The human veteran protected the dragon egg from poachers. Then the dragons protected him back. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The rain poured relentlessly over the dense forest of Andera Valley, turning the dirt paths into muddy streams. Sergeant Marcus Reed trudged through the downpour, his prosthetic legs sinking slightly with each step. 3 years after returning from his final deployment, he still hadn't fully adjusted to civilian life in this remote mountain region, but the isolation suited him better than the chaos of the city. His cabin came into view through the curtain of rain, a simple wooden structure nestled against the mountainside, far from the nearest town. Marcus had chosen this location deliberately, seeking distance from a world that felt increasingly foreign to him. The nightmares still came, though less frequently now, and the phantom pain in his missing leg remained a constant companion. As he approached his home, something caught his attention, a disturbance in the underbrush about 50 yards to the east. In an instant, his military training kicked in. Marcus dropped to a crouch, his senses heightened as he scanned the area. The movement wasn't natural, not like a deer or mountain lion. Someone was trying very hard not to be seen. Staying low, Marcus circled around, using the sound of the rain to mask his approach. Through a break in the vegetation, he spotted them. 3 figures dressed in camouflage gear, moving with purpose. They weren't locals. Their equipment was too specialized, too expensive. One carried what looked like a high-powered tranquilizer rifle, while another held some kind of scanning device. Poachers. They'd been a growing problem in the valley over the past year, hunting the rare species that inhabited the protected wilderness. Marcus had reported tracks to the ranger station before, but he'd never encountered any directly. He followed at a distance, careful not to reveal his presence. The poachers moved deeper into a section of the forest that Marcus rarely visited, a region of steep cliffs and natural caves. As they disappeared around a rocky outcropping, Marcus quickened his pace, wincing as his prosthetic caught on a root. When he rounded the same outcropping, the poachers had stopped in front of a cave entrance partially hidden by hanging vines. One of them, a tall woman with a scar across her cheek, consulted the scanner, then nodded to her companions. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a close-cropped beard, smiled. Confirmed. Signal strong. Exactly where our informant said it would be. How much do you think it's worth? Asked the third, a younger man with nervous eyes. Millions, the woman replied. If it's viable, the collectors will pay whatever we ask. Marcus remained hidden, trying to discern what they were after. This area wasn't known for any particularly valuable wildlife. The poachers entered the cave, and after a moment's hesitation, Marcus followed, keeping to the shadows. The cave opened into a larger chamber, illuminated by the poachers' flashlights. In the center, nestled in a depression in the stone floor, sat a large, iridescent object. At first, Marcus thought it was some kind of geode or crystal formation. It shimmered with colors that seemed to shift and flow across its surface. Then he realized what he was looking at. It was an egg, larger than any egg he'd ever seen, roughly the size of a beach ball. Its surface glowed with a faint inner light, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. Jackpot, whispered the leader, approaching the egg. Perfect condition. No signs of hatching yet. The woman ran a hand over the surface. Temperature's right. It's still viable. Then let's package it and get out, said the younger man, glancing nervously toward the cave entrance. This place gives me the creeps. Marcus watched as they prepared a specialized container, lined with some kind of thermal material. They were planning to steal the egg, whatever kind of egg it was. Something in him rebelled at the thought. During his military service, he'd seen enough taking, enough destruction. Since moving to the valley, he'd found a measure of peace in the natural world, in letting things exist as they were meant to. He stepped forward, deliberately snapping a twig beneath his boot. The poachers whirled around, the leader immediately raising his rifle. This is a protected wilderness area, Marcus said calmly, keeping his hands visible. Whatever you're doing here is illegal. The leader's expression hardened. Walk away, friend. This doesn't concern you. I'm making it my concern, Marcus replied. Put the egg back, pack up your gear, and leave. I won't report this if you go now. The woman laughed. Do you have any idea what this is? What it's worth? Don't care, said Marcus. It's not yours to take. The younger man fidgeted with something at his belt, a stun baton, Marcus realized. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Last chance, the leader said, aiming the tranquilizer rifle at Marcus's chest. Walk away or take a very long nap. Marcus had faced worse odds in combat. In one fluid motion, he grabbed a handful of loose stones from the cave floor and threw them at the leader's face. As the man flinched, Marcus charged forward, tackling him to the ground. The rifle discharged, the dart embedding itself in the cave wall. The younger man rushed forward with the stun baton. Marcus rolled away from the leader, sweeping his good leg in an arc that caught the younger poacher behind the knees. The man went down hard, the baton clattering away. The woman pulled a hunting knife from her belt. You're making a big mistake, she snarled. Not the first one, Marcus replied, rising to his feet. What followed was a brutal, close-quarters fight. Despite being outnumbered, Marcus had the advantage of military training. He fought defensively, using the confined space of the cave to limit their ability to surround him. The leader recovered his rifle and fired again. Marcus dodged, but his prosthetic leg betrayed him. He stumbled, and the woman seized the opportunity to slash at him with her knife. The blade cut through his jacket and bit into his side, not deep, but painful. Marcus grunted and drove his elbow into her solar plexus. As she doubled over, he grabbed her wrist and twisted until she dropped the knife. The younger man had recovered the stun baton and lunged forward. This time, Marcus couldn't dodge completely. The baton connected with his shoulder, sending a jolt of electricity through his body. His muscles seized, and he fell to one knee. The leader approached, rifle raised for another shot. Should have minded your own business, cripple. Through the pain, something flared in Marcus, a familiar heat that had carried him through the worst moments of combat. With a roar, he pushed through the electric shock and launched himself at the leader. They collided and fell backward, directly toward the egg. Marcus saw what was about to happen and twisted in midair, taking the brunt of the impact against the stone floor. The leader landed on top of him, driving the air from his lungs. For a moment, the cave seemed to spin. Marcus fought to remain conscious, aware that the egg was now just inches from his head. Up close, he could see intricate patterns in its surface, swirls of color that seemed almost like writing. The leader stood, planting a boot on Marcus's chest. Enough games, he growled, aiming the rifle directly at Marcus's face. Before he could fire, a low rumble shook the cave. Small stones and dust fell from the ceiling. The egg's pulsing glow intensified. What the hell? The younger man said, backing toward the entrance. Is that an earthquake? The woman checked her scanner, her face paling. We need to go? Now. Not without the egg, the leader insisted. Forget the egg, she snapped. Look at these readings. Something's coming. The rumbling grew stronger. From deeper in the cave system came the sound of shifting stone, as though something large was moving through the tunnels. The leader hesitated, looking between the egg and the darkness beyond. Finally, he cursed and stepped away from Marcus. We'll be back, he promised, then followed his companions toward the exit. Marcus remained on the floor, breathing heavily, his side bleeding and muscles still spasming from the stun baton. He should leave too, he knew. Whatever was causing the tremors could be dangerous. But his gaze kept returning to the egg, pulsing with increased urgency now. With effort, he crawled to the egg and examined it for damage. The surface appeared intact, still shimmering with inner light. Up close, the patterns were even more intricate than he'd first thought. Complex geometries that seemed to flow and change even as he watched. The rumbling intensified. From the deeper recesses of the cave came a sound that wasn't just shifting stone. It was a growl, low and resonant, that seemed to vibrate through Marcus's very bones. Instinct told him to flee, but something else, something he couldn't quite articulate, kept him rooted in place. The egg wasn't safe here. If the poachers returned with reinforcements, they would take it, and whatever was growing inside would never have a chance to live. Decision made. Marcus removed his jacket and carefully wrapped it around the egg. The surface was warm to the touch, and he could feel a slight vibration through the fabric. With great care, he lifted the bundle. It was heavy, perhaps 30 pounds, but manageable. The growling from the depths grew louder. Marcus began moving toward the exit, cradling the egg against his chest. He had no plan beyond getting it away from the poachers, but that would have to be enough for now. As he reached the mouth of the cave, a shaft of late afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the forest. The rain had stopped, leaving everything glistening and renewed. Marcus started down the path toward his cabin, the precious bundle held securely in his arms. Behind him, something large moved in the shadows of the cave. A pair of luminous eyes watched his departure, then withdrew into the darkness. By the time Marcus reached his cabin, night had fallen. The journey had been slow and painful, his injured side stinging with every step, the weight of the egg growing heavier as his strength waned. Once inside, he gently placed the wrapped egg on his kitchen table and collapsed into a chair. Now that the immediate danger had passed, questions flooded his mind. What kind of egg was this? It was too large to belong to any bird or reptile native to the valley. The colors, the patterns, the inner light, none of it matched anything in his knowledge of local wildlife. Marcus unwrapped his jacket from around the egg, revealing the shimmering surface once more. In the warm light of his cabin, the colors seemed even more vibrant. Deep blues and purples swirled with gold and crimson, flowing across the shell in mesmerizing patterns. He needed to report this, he knew. The ranger station would have protocols for unidentified wildlife. But something held him back. The poachers had said the egg was worth millions to collectors. If word got out, others would come looking for it. And there was the matter of whatever had been moving in the deeper parts of the cave, the source of that bone-shaking growl. Marcus's military instincts told him to secure the egg first, gather information, then decide on a course of action. He found an old wool blanket and fashioned a nest in a large cooking pot, then carefully transferred the egg into it. The setup wasn't ideal, but it would have to do for now. His side needed attention. Marcus removed his shirt, wincing as the fabric pulled away from the knife wound. The cut wasn't deep enough to require stitches, but it needed cleaning. He washed and bandaged it as best he could, then swallowed some painkillers from his dwindling supply. As he worked, his gaze kept returning to the egg. There was something almost hypnotic about the way the colors shifted and flowed. Several times, he caught himself standing motionless, staring at the patterns until his eyes began to water. Marcus forced himself to focus. Food first, then rest. He could decide what to do about the egg in the morning. He prepared a simple meal of canned soup and crackers, eating mechanically while keeping one eye on his unusual guest. After dinner, exhaustion overtook him. Marcus moved the pot containing the egg next to his bed, then lay down, not bothering to undress further. Despite his fatigue, sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the poachers, heard their promises to return. And underneath that, the memory of that growl echoing through the cave. Sometime after midnight, Marcus jerked awake from a fitful doze. Something had changed. The cabin was dark except for a soft glow coming from beside his bed. The egg was pulsing more rapidly now, the light brightening and dimming in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. As he watched, a thin crack appeared on the surface of the egg. No, 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 Marcus muttered, sitting up. Not now? Not here. Another crack joined the first, then another. The pulsing light intensified, illuminating the entire room in a shifting kaleidoscope of colors. From within the egg came a soft tapping sound, like tiny claws scratching against the shell. Marcus had no idea what to do. Should he help the creature emerge? Leave it alone? His knowledge of wildlife rehabilitation was limited to the occasional injured bird or rabbit. Nothing like this. Before he could decide, a large piece of the shell fell away. Through the opening, Marcus glimpsed movement, something small and dark shifting within. Another piece broke off, then another. Finally, with a sound between a crack and a squish, the top half of the egg split apart. Amid the fragments of iridescent shell sat a creature unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It was roughly the size of a house cat, with a sinuous body covered in scales that shimmered with the same colors as the egg. A pair of delicate, membranous wings were folded against its sides, and a long, tapering tail curled around its body. Its head was triangular, with ridges above its eyes that might one day grow into horns. But it was those eyes that captured Marcus's attention. Large, luminous, and unmistakably intelligent, they fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. Marcus knew instantly what he was looking at, though his rational mind rebelled against the impossible truth. Dragons didn't exist. They were myths, legends, fantasy creatures from children's stories and ancient folklore. Yet here one was, newly hatched, and staring at him from amid the shattered remains of its egg. The tiny dragon made a sound, a high-pitched chirp that seemed to convey both curiosity and uncertainty. It tried to stand, legs wobbling, wings unfurling slightly before folding back. The effort seemed to exhaust it, and it sank back down, still watching Marcus with those unervingly intelligent eyes. "Hey there, little one," Marcus said softly, not knowing what else to do. "Welcome to the world, I guess." The dragon tilted its head, as though considering his words. Then, with deliberate movements, it began to edge toward him across the blanket. Marcus remained still, unsure whether to retreat or stay put. The dragon reached the edge of the pot and paused, seeming to gather its strength. Then, with a determined chirp, it launched itself toward the bed. Its leap fell short. Marcus instinctively reached out, catching the small creature before it could hit the floor. The dragon's scales were warm against his palms, and he could feel a rapid heartbeat beneath his fingers. For a moment, they regarded each other in silence, the battle-worn veteran and the newly hatched mythical beast. Then the dragon made that chirping sound again and curled into the warmth of Marcus's hands. Something shifted in Marcus's chest, a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years, not since his days looking after the younger soldiers in his unit. This creature was vulnerable, alone in a world it didn't understand, just like he had been after returning home with one less limb and too many nightmares. "Guess we're in this together now, huh?" he murmured. The dragon chirped in what sounded like agreement, then curled into a tight ball and promptly fell asleep in his palms. Marcus carefully placed the sleeping dragon back in its makeshift nest, mindful not to wake it. Whatever was going to happen next, he needed to be prepared. The poachers would be back. Of that, he was certain. And if there were more dragons in those caves, as the growl suggested, they might come looking for their missing egg. Either way, Marcus had a responsibility now. He had chosen to take the egg, and now he would protect the creature that had emerged from it. It was the first clear purpose he'd felt since leaving the military, and despite the danger, despite the impossibility of it all, he welcomed it. Outside, in the darkness of the forest, something large moved between the trees. Luminous eyes surveyed the cabin from a distance, nostrils flaring as they caught an unmistakable scent. Then, with a rustle of leaves, the watcher withdrew, melting back into the shadows of the night. Morning came with a cold clarity that seemed to mock the fantastical events of the previous night. For a moment, as Marcus blinked away sleep, he wondered if it had all been a dream. The poachers, the egg, the impossible hatching. Then he heard a soft chirping from beside his bed and knew it had been real. The baby dragon was awake, watching him with those unsettlingly intelligent eyes. In the daylight, its scales were even more vibrant, a base color of deep sapphire blue with highlights of gold along its spine and the edges of its wings. It had managed to climb out of the pot and was now perched on his bedside table, tail swishing back and forth like a curious cat's. "Good morning to you too," Marcus said, sitting up slowly. The dragon chirped again, then turned its attention to a framed photograph on the table. Marcus in uniform, standing with his squad before his final deployment. The creature studied the image, head tilting from side to side. That was another life, Marcus told it, not entirely sure why he was explaining himself to a creature that couldn't possibly understand him. Before this, he added, tapping his prosthetic leg. To his surprise, the dragon looked from the photograph to his prosthetic, then back to his face. There was something in that gaze, not just intelligence, but comprehension. Marcus shook his head. He was projecting, anthropomorphizing. The creature was newly hatched. It couldn't possibly understand concepts like war or injury. His side throbbed, reminding him of the previous day's fight. He needed to change the bandage, eat something, and figure out what to do next. The immediate problem was what to feed the dragon. If it followed the pattern of reptiles, it might eat meat, but he couldn't be sure. As if reading his thoughts, the dragon chirped more insistently and hopped down to the floor, scampering toward the kitchen area with surprising agility for a creature that had just hatched hours ago. Marcus followed, watching as the dragon sniffed around the cabinets. Hungry, huh? Let's see what we've got. He opened the refrigerator, and the dragon immediately showed interest in a package of raw venison steaks, the last of what a local hunter had traded him for mechanical repairs. Marcus unwrapped the meat and placed a small piece on a plate, setting it on the floor. The dragon approached cautiously, sniffed the offering, then devoured it with surprising speed and precision. It looked up at Marcus expectantly. More? He asked, and the dragon chirped in what he chose to interpret as affirmation. He provided another, larger piece, which disappeared just as quickly. After a third helping, the dragon seemed satisfied, curling up by the plate and beginning to groom itself, licking its claws and rubbing them over its scales in a manner reminiscent of a cat's ablutions. Marcus took the opportunity to change his bandage and eat his own breakfast. As he moved around the cabin, he found himself talking to the dragon, explaining what he was doing, pointing out features of his home. It was ridiculous. He'd never been one to talk to himself or to pets, but something about the creature's attentive gaze encouraged conversation. After breakfast, Marcus faced the question of what to do next. He needed supplies, more meat for the dragon, and medical supplies for himself. But he couldn't leave the creature alone, and he certainly couldn't take it with him into town. Before he could decide, a sound from outside caught his attention, the distant but unmistakable rumble of vehicles approaching along the forest road. Marcus moved to the window, careful to stay hidden from view. Through the trees, he spotted two off-road vehicles moving slowly along the track that led to his cabin. Even at a distance, he recognized one of the passengers, the leader of the Poachers from yesterday. "Company's coming," he told the dragon, which had tensed at his sudden alertness. "And they're not the friendly kind." The dragon made a low sound in its throat, not quite a growl, but close. It moved to stand beside Marcus at the window, wings slightly unfurled as though preparing for threat. Marcus assessed his options quickly. His cabin was remote but not defensible. Too many windows, only one exit. He had a hunting rifle and a handgun, but using them would escalate the situation beyond recovery. What he needed was to avoid confrontation entirely. "We need to go," he told the dragon. "Now." He grabbed a backpack and quickly packed essentials: food, water, first aid supplies, a compass, and matches. After a moment's hesitation, he added his handgun. The vehicles were getting closer. He had minutes at most. The dragon seemed to understand the urgency. It scampered to the door and waited, looking back at Marcus expectantly. "You are one strange lizard," Marcus muttered as he shouldered the pack and grabbed his rifle. They slipped out the back door just as the vehicles pulled up in front of the cabin. Marcus led the way into the forest, moving as quickly and quietly as possible, the dragon keeping pace beside him. Its small size belied its speed and agility. It navigated the rough terrain with ease, sometimes running, sometimes making short gliding leaps with its undeveloped wings. Marcus headed deeper into the valley, away from the trails and toward the rougher, less accessible terrain near the base of the mountains. The Poachers would search his cabin first, but they would eventually pick up their trail. He needed to find a place to hide, somewhere defensible, until he could figure out a longer-term plan. As they moved through the forest, Marcus noticed something odd. The dragon wasn't just following him, it was leading him. Every so often, it would pause, sniff the air, then change direction slightly, chirping until Marcus followed. "You know where we're going?" he asked after the third such correction. The dragon chirped affirmatively and continued forward with purpose. Marcus's military training told him to stick to his own plan, but his instincts, the same ones that had kept him alive through 2 tours of duty, told him to trust the creature. So he followed, even as they moved deeper into a part of the valley he'd never explored before. By midday, they had covered several miles of rough terrain. Marcus's prosthetic was holding up, but the site of his knife wound had begun to throb painfully, and he suspected it might be becoming infected. They needed to stop soon. The dragon led him to a small stream, then paused, looking at Marcus's injured side and chirping insistently. "Yeah, I know," Marcus said, setting down his pack. "Need to take care of that." He knelt by the stream, removed his shirt, and carefully peeled back the bandage. The wound looked angry, the skin around it red and inflamed. Not good. To his surprise, the dragon approached and examined the injury closely. Then, before Marcus could react, it bent its head and licked the wound with a long, forked tongue. "Hey!" Marcus pulled back instinctively. "What are you?" The words died in his throat as a strange sensation spread from the wound. Not pain, but a cool, tingling numbness. Looking down, he saw that the redness was already fading, the edges of the cut seeming to draw together slightly. "Well," he said after a moment, "that's handy." The dragon made a sound that Marcus would have sworn was smug satisfaction. They rested by the stream while Marcus ate some of the food he'd packed and shared the last of the raw venison with the dragon. As they sat, the creature's head suddenly snapped up, eyes narrowing as it looked back the way they had come. Marcus tensed, listening. At first, he heard nothing, but then, faintly, came the sound of voices and breaking branches. The poachers had picked up their trail faster than he'd anticipated. The dragon was already on its feet, chirping urgently and moving deeper into the forest. Marcus followed, forcing himself to ignore the pain in his side and the fatigue in his muscles. They needed distance, and they needed it fast. For hours they pushed on, the sounds of pursuit sometimes fading, sometimes growing closer. The poachers were persistent, he had to give them that. What worried him more was the approaching nightfall. Navigating the unfamiliar terrain would become much more difficult in darkness. As the sun began to set, the dragon led them to the base of a steep, rocky slope. At first, Marcus thought they'd reached a dead end, but the creature slipped between 2 large boulders, revealing a narrow opening, the entrance to a small cave. Marcus hesitated. Caves meant confined spaces, limited escape routes. But they also offered shelter and concealment. With night falling and the poachers still on their trail, they had little choice. He squeezed through the opening, finding himself in a space just large enough to sit upright. The dragon moved deeper, into shadows that Marcus's human eyes couldn't penetrate. After a moment, a soft glow emanated from further in. The dragon's scales were luminescing, providing just enough light to see by. "Convenient," Marcus remarked, settling against the wall of the cave. His side hurt less thanks to whatever was in the dragon's saliva, but exhaustion was catching up with him rapidly. The dragon returned to his side, curling up against him with a contented chirp. Its scales were warm, radiating heat like a small furnace. "We need a plan," Marcus told it, absently stroking its back. The scales were smooth, almost silky to the touch. "Those people won't give up easily. Not with what you're worth to them." The dragon made a dismissive sound and pressed closer against his side. Despite the danger, despite the impossibility of his situation, Marcus felt a smile tug at his lips. "Yeah, I know. One problem at a time, right?" He closed his eyes, intending only to rest them for a moment. But the warmth of the dragon, the rhythmic sound of its breathing, and his own exhaustion conspired against him. Within minutes, Marcus was asleep. He dreamed of fire and flight, of vast caverns glittering with crystal formations, and of ancient eyes watching from darkness. In the dream, he wasn't afraid, he was home. When Marcus awoke, pale morning light was filtering through the cave entrance. The dragon was gone. Panic surged through him as he scrambled to his feet, nearly hitting his head on the low ceiling. Had the poachers found them? Had the dragon wandered off and gotten captured? He squeezed through the entrance, emerging into the early morning forest. "Dragon?" he called softly, feeling slightly ridiculous. He hadn't given the creature a name. It hadn't occurred to him that he would need to. A familiar chirp answered from nearby. Marcus turned to see the dragon perched on a boulder, something clutched in its claws. As he approached, he saw that it was a freshly killed rabbit. The dragon dropped the rabbit at his feet, looking up with what Marcus could only interpret as pride. "You brought me breakfast?" Marcus asked, genuinely touched by the gesture. The dragon chirped affirmatively, then nudged the rabbit toward him with its snout. "Thank you," Marcus said, picking up the offering. "Though I'll need to cook it first." The dragon tilted its head, clearly not understanding the concept of cooking. Marcus smiled and set about gathering materials for a small, smokeless fire. It was a risk, but they needed hot food, and he suspected they were far enough from the poachers now to chance it. As he worked, Marcus found himself talking to the dragon, explaining what he was doing and why. The creature watched with apparent fascination, particularly when the fire caught and began to burn. "You like that, huh?" Marcus said, noticing how the dragon edged closer to the flames, eyes wide with what looked like wonder. "I guess fire would interest you. It's in your nature, if the stories are right." The dragon chirped and extended one wing toward the heat, as though testing how it felt against the delicate membrane. Marcus prepared the rabbit and set it to cook over the carefully contained fire. While they waited, he checked his wound again. To his amazement, it was nearly healed. What had been an angry, potentially infected cut was now just a pink line, as though it had been healing for weeks rather than hours. "That's some saliva you've got there," he told the dragon, which preened at the praise. After they had eaten, Marcus the cooked rabbit, the dragon enjoying the entrails and organs raw, they faced the question of what to do next. The poachers were still out there, likely widening their search. Going back to the cabin wasn't an option. It would be the first place they'd watch. As though sensing his thoughts, the dragon chirped to get his attention, then began moving deeper into the forest, looking back expectantly. "You want me to follow you again?" Marcus asked. The dragon chirped affirmatively. Marcus considered his options. The creature had led him to safety yesterday, had found them shelter for the night, and had even hunted breakfast. Its instincts seemed sound, and frankly, he didn't have a better plan. "Lead on, then," he said, gathering his pack. They traveled through the day, moving steadily upward as the forest gave way to rockier terrain. The dragon set a pace that challenged Marcus, but never pushed beyond what he could manage with his prosthetic leg. Whenever they rested, the creature would lick his old wound again, and Marcus noticed that even the chronic pain in his residual limb seemed to lessen after these treatments. By late afternoon, they had reached a part of the mountains that Marcus had never explored, a series of steep cliffs split by narrow ravines. The dragon led him along what appeared to be a game trail, winding between massive boulders and through stands of stunted pines. As they rounded a particularly large boulder, Marcus stopped short. Ahead of them, the trail opened onto a wide ledge, and standing on that ledge, silhouetted against the setting sun, was a figure that made his breath catch in his throat. It was another dragon, fully grown, at least 20 feet from snout to tail tip, with scales that shimmered midnight blue in the fading light. Its wings were folded against its sides, but even at rest, Marcus could tell their span would be impressive. A ridge of golden spines ran from the back of its head down to the tip of its tail. The baby dragon let out a series of excited chirps and bounded forward. The adult lowered its head, touching noses with the smaller creature in what seemed like a greeting. Then, slowly, it raised its gaze to meet Marcus's. Time seemed to stop as human and dragon regarded each other across the ledge. Marcus felt rooted to the spot, not by fear, but by a profound sense of wonder and recognition. The dragon's eyes were like the baby's, only larger and filled with an ancient intelligence that made Marcus feel as though he was being measured, evaluated to his very core. Then, to his astonishment, the dragon inclined its head in what could only be described as a bow. "You honor my child with your protection, human," said a voice, not aloud, but in Marcus's mind, resonant and unmistakably female. "For this, you have the gratitude of Sarati, guardian of the western peaks." Marcus staggered back, his mind reeling. The dragon, Sarati, had spoken directly into his thoughts. You can talk," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not as you do," came the reply in his mind, "but our kinds can communicate when necessary. It has been many centuries since we chose to do so." The baby dragon chirped excitedly, scampering back and forth between them as though trying to facilitate their meeting. "He hatched in my cabin," Marcus explained. "There were poachers after the egg. I couldn't leave it for them to find." Sarathi's gaze seemed to soften. "You took my egg from its nest." It wasn't a question, but Marcus felt compelled to answer anyway. "Yes, I didn't know what it was at first. The poachers had tracked it down, and I intervened. Afterward, I was worried they'd return, so I took it somewhere safe." The great dragon made a sound that might have been a chuckle. "Had you not moved it, my child might now be in the hands of those who would harm him. You acted with courage and compassion," Marcus read. The use of his name startled him. "You know who I am? My child has shared much during your journey here. Dragons are born with the accumulated knowledge of their ancestors, but personal experiences must be lived. Your protection has given him his first lessons in trust and cooperation between different kinds." Sarathi's massive head lowered until her eyes were level with Marcus's. "For this, I name you dragon friend, an honor not bestowed on a human in 10 generations." The baby dragon chirped happily and climbed up Marcus's leg to perch on his shoulder, wings partially extending for balance. "Does he have a name?" Marcus asked. "He does, though it cannot be fully expressed in your language. The closest approximation would be Chiron, which means brave dawn in your tongue." "Chiron," Marcus repeated, and the baby dragon chirped in apparent approval. A shadow crossed Sarathi's expression, her thought voice becoming grave. "The danger has not passed, dragon friend. Those who sought my egg will not abandon their hunt. Even now, they call for others of their kind, bringing weapons and machines to these mountains." "They're professionals," Marcus agreed, "and they know the egg hatched. They'll be looking for Chiron now." "Not just for my child," Sarathi corrected. "They have discovered our existence, a secret we have kept for millennia. My mate patrols our territory, watching their movements. They seek our entire clutch, and the knowledge of our kind that would bring them wealth and power." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If word got out that dragons weren't just myth, but living creatures, these mountains would be swarming with poachers, researchers, military forces, all wanting to capture or study or weaponize the dragons. "How many of you are there?" he asked. Sarathi hesitated. "Few," she finally admitted. "Our kind breeds rarely, and only in safe places. This range has been our home for 12 generations, hidden from human expansion by its remoteness. Until now. What will you do?" "We must move our remaining eggs. There is another range, far to the north, where some of our kin dwell. But the journey is perilous, especially with unhatched young." Sarathi's tail lashed in agitation. "And these hunters must be dealt with. If they return to their cities with proof of our existence, nowhere will be safe." "Maybe I can help," Marcus offered. "I know how humans think, how they operate. And I have contacts, people who owe me favors. We might be able to discredit the poachers, make sure no one believes them even if they do get away." Sarathi studied him with ancient eyes. "You would do this? After all your kind has taken from you?" Her gaze dropped meaningfully to his prosthetic leg. "What happened to me was war," he said simply. "Human against human. It has nothing to do with you or your kind." He gestured to Chiron. "Besides, I think I'm already involved, whether I like it or not." "Very well, dragon friend. We accept your aid in this matter. She turned, gesturing with one wing toward a narrow cleft in the cliff face behind her. Come. Night approaches, and you should meet the others. The passage opened into a vast cavern illuminated by bioluminescent fungi. In the center burned a fire that gave off no smoke, flames dancing in blue and gold hues over crystal formations. Around the fire were 3 more adult dragons and 2 juveniles. My mate, Vorath. Sarati indicated a massive dragon with scales of deep forest green accented with silver. My sister, Elasri, and her mate, Norin. These were slightly smaller dragons, one copper-hued, the other white with azure markings. And their offspring, Talon and Mirith. Vorath approached with a deliberate tread that made the ground tremble. This is the human who took our egg. His thought voice resonated like distant thunder. This is the human who saved our child, Sarati corrected. He is named Dragonfriend, and he comes to offer aid against those who would hunt us. Vorath snorted, a gout of steam escaping his nostrils. And how does one crippled human propose to stand against the weapons and numbers of his kind? Marcus met the dragon's gaze steadily. The same way I stood against 3 poachers to protect your egg, with strategy, knowledge of their weaknesses, and determination. And with our help, added Elasri. If Sarati has named him friend, then he has earned our trust. As the dragons discussed their situation, Marcus learned that the poachers had established a base camp near his cabin. There were now 8 of them, with thermal imaging equipment and specialized weapons designed for live capture. Worse, their leader had mentioned a primary investor arriving the next day to oversee the operation. Marcus outlined his plan, a combination of psychological warfare and strategic destruction. The dragons would use their abilities to create an illusion of overwhelming force, while Marcus would sabotage the poachers' equipment and convince them that any claims about dragons would destroy their credibility. They moved out at midnight, each dragon taking a position around the poachers' camp. Marcus approached openly, claiming he wanted to negotiate a share of the profits in exchange for leading them to the nest. While he distracted them, Chiron infiltrated the camp to disable their communications equipment. At the signal, the dragons created chaos, roars echoing from multiple directions, glimpses of massive shapes in the darkness, controlled bursts of flame. Marcus used the confusion to rig the fuel canisters on their vehicles to explode, then rejoined Chiron at the edge of the clearing. The psychological effect was devastating. Most of the poachers fled in terror, abandoning their equipment. Only the leader, the female poacher named Anya, and 1 guard remained, backing toward the forest edge. This isn't over, the leader called out. We have records, proof. The world will know about you. Marcus stepped into the firelight, Chiron perched defiantly on his shoulder. No, they won't. Because no one will believe you. The leader's eyes widened. You're working with them? They're my friends, Marcus replied simply. And this mountain is their home. You're not welcome here. Anya raised her weapon, but the guard stopped her. Don't, he hissed. We're outmatched. You have nothing, Marcus told them. No egg, no specimens, no viable DNA samples. Your equipment is destroyed, including your scanning devices. All you have is a story that sounds like a hallucination or a hoax. Who's going to believe you saw dragons? The truth sank in. Without evidence, their claims would be dismissed as fantasy or fraud. The investor would withdraw support rather than be associated with such apparent lunacy. You've lost, Marcus concluded. The smart play now is to leave and forget what you saw. Because if you come back here, next time they won't be so merciful. The 3 poachers retreated into the darkness. Once they were gone, the dragons systematically destroyed everything left behind, reducing technology to slag, documents to ash, and vehicles to unrecognizable husks. By dawn, nothing remained but scorched earth and twisted metal, evidence not of dragons, but of a terrible accident with stored fuel. As the sun rose, Sarati approached Marcus. You have given us time to move our remaining eggs, to find safer territory. Will you go far? Marcus asked, surprised by the pang of loss he felt. To the northern range. It is a journey of many days, even for dragons. Sarathi's mental voice softened. But not all of us will go. Chiron chirped and pressed closer to Marcus's neck, making his preference clear. My child has chosen you as his bond partner, Sarathi explained. Such bonds were common in ancient times, when dragons and humans lived in harmony. They have become rare in these recent centuries, as our kinds grew apart. You mean he wants to stay with me? Marcus asked, astonished. If you will have him. He is young yet, and will require guidance as he grows. But the bond between you is already strong. I will remain as well, came Alasri's mental voice. My offspring are grown enough to travel with their father. I will teach Chiron what he needs to know and serve as liaison between our kinds. Marcus was stunned. You'd stay behind, separate from your family, just for this? Dragons live very long lives, Marcus read. A separation of a few decades is but a moment to us, and there is value in rebuilding the ancient bond between our kinds. Perhaps, one day, we will not need to hide. I would be honored, Marcus said simply, and felt Karen's joy as a burst of warmth against his mind. By midday, Vorith, Norin, and the juveniles had departed with most of the unhatched eggs, beginning the long journey to the northern range. Sarathi remained only long enough to share a farewell with her mate and child. Protect him well, dragon friend, were her parting words to Marcus, and allow him to protect you in return. That is the nature of the bond you share. Then she was gone, following her family northward. Marcus, Chiron, and Alasri returned to his cabin. Alasri decided to make her home in the nearby cave system, where she could hunt and fly without being observed, but promised to visit often to instruct Chiron. Marcus began planning to expand his cabin to accommodate Chiron as he grew. That night, as Marcus prepared for bed, Chiron created a nest for himself on a blanket beside the bed, his scales glowing softly in the darkness. You know, Marcus told the baby dragon, I came to these mountains to be alone, to forget. But you've given me something to remember instead, something worth protecting. In the months that followed, Marcus's life transformed. The nightmares that had plagued him since his injury became less frequent, then ceased altogether. The phantom pain in his missing leg faded, whether from Karen's healing saliva or simply the dragon's comforting presence. He expanded the cabin as promised, adding a large room with high ceilings that could accommodate Karen's growing form. The baby dragon was developing rapidly under Alasri's tutelage, learning to control his fire, to fly with increasing skill, and to hunt for himself. Marcus found himself learning as well about dragon history, their ancient relationship with humans, and their unique perspective on the world. Alasri was a patient teacher, her mental voice rich with stories that stretched back thousands of years. Occasionally, they would spot aircraft flying over the valley, sometimes circling in patterns that suggested search operations. The Poachers, or their backers, hadn't given up entirely. But without equipment or evidence, their efforts were unfocused, doomed to failure. As autumn turned to winter, Marcus began to venture into town more frequently, gathering supplies and cautiously reconnecting with the local community. He was careful never to reveal his secret, but he no longer felt the need to isolate himself completely. One evening, as snow fell gently outside, Marcus sat by the fire with Chiron curled beside him, the dragon now the size of a large dog and still growing steadily. Alasri had joined them for what had become a regular tradition, sharing stories of their respective worlds. There is something I have been meaning to tell you, Alasri said, her mental voice carrying a note of solemnity, about the nature of the bond between human and dragon. When a dragon chooses a bond partner, the connection goes beyond companionship. There is an exchange of essence, subtle but profound. Alasri's luminous eyes studied him carefully. Have you noticed changes in yourself since Chiron hatched? Marcus considered. His health had improved dramatically. His senses seemed sharper, and wounds healed more quickly than they should. The bond works both ways. As Chiron grows stronger, so too will you. Your lifespan may extend beyond normal human years. Your resilience to injury and illness will increase. I'll live longer? Marcus asked, startled. Not immortally, Elasri clarified, but longer than you would have otherwise. It is part of the gift of the bond. In ancient times, dragon-bonded humans were known for their longevity and vitality, even into advanced age. Marcus glanced down at his prosthetic leg. Could it help with this? The bond cannot restore what was lost before it was formed, but it will prevent such losses in the future, and it may ease the burdens of those you already bear. Chiron pressed closer, a low purring sound emanating from his chest. Through their strengthening bond, Marcus felt a wave of affection and loyalty, Charon's wordless reassurance that whatever changes came, they would face them together. As winter deepened, word reached Marcus through trips to town that the research expedition had been discredited. Rumors spoke of embezzlement, of false claims made to investors, of equipment lost through negligence. The leader and his associates had become laughingstocks, their tales of dragons dismissed as desperate attempts to cover their failures. Your plan worked better than we could have hoped, Elasri observed. Marcus nodded, relieved but still cautious. We should remain vigilant. People talk, stories spread. Someday, someone else might come looking. And when they do, they will find us prepared, Elasri assured him. The bond between dragon and human has been renewed. In time, others may join us, those worthy of trust, those who will protect our secret rather than exploit it. Spring came to the mountains, bringing new growth and renewed energy. Chiron, now the size of a pony, had learned to fly properly, sometimes accompanying Elasri on hunting expeditions high above the valley. On one such day, as Marcus watched them soar against the blue sky, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in less than a year. From a wounded warrior seeking isolation, he had become part of something ancient and profound, a bridge between two worlds that had drifted apart through centuries of misunderstanding and fear. That evening, as they gathered for their usual storytelling session, Elasri brought news. A message from Sarati, she announced. They have established a new sanctuary in the northern range. The eggs have hatched successfully. Chiron chirped happily at the news of his siblings. She also sends word of others, dragons who have lived in isolation, fearful of human encroachment. News of your alliance has spread among our kind. Some have expressed interest in renewing the ancient bonds. Marcus looked up in surprise. You mean more dragons might seek human partners? Only with those who prove worthy, Elasri cautioned. As you did. But yes, the possibility exists. What began as a chance encounter in a cave might grow into something more significant, a new chapter in the long history between our kinds. The potential was both thrilling and daunting. Marcus stroked Charon's scales, feeling the young dragon's warmth and strength, so much greater than when he had first emerged from his egg, yet still only a fraction of what he would become. Whatever comes next, Marcus said, we'll face it together. Chiron rumbled in agreement, a sound deeper and more resonant than his childhood chirps. Through their bond, Marcus felt the dragon's absolute conviction, a promise as unbreakable as the mountains themselves. Outside, beyond the windows of the expanded cabin, the forest stretched toward distant peaks, wild and free. Somewhere in that vastness, other dragons soared, watching, waiting, and perhaps other humans looked up at the sky, wondering if the ancient legends might contain more truth than they had ever dared to believe. For Marcus Reed, former soldier and now dragon friend, the answer was curled beside him, scales gleaming in the firelight, living proof that sometimes the most fantastic stories are the ones waiting to be lived. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.